Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of RAP Resilience Against Power and Privilege. My name is Hoel, if you didn't get that from the first time. And I'm here with my co host, JoJo,
Hi, everyone. Thank you for tuning in.
and our very special guest, Sherry Norris.
Hi, good afternoon.
Today's episode will be focusing on TEK in a colonial world, also known as traditional ecological knowledge, and in relation to colonial land management practices. But before we get into that, I would like to give a land acknowledgement. We are guests on the island of Manhattan, traditional lands of the Lenni Lenape, the Manhattan, the Canarsie, the Shinnecock, the Wappinger, the Regawak, Munsee, and Haudenosaunee Nation. We want to take this opportunity to recognize the original stewards of the land who are still here and make it especially clear for our listeners. We hope this acknowledgement helps people to think how they can actively contribute to centering Indigenous voices and practices. And Sherry is joining us from Hechuan, also known as El Cerrito, which is a homeland of the Lashon Ohlone, which you learned about in our last episode.
Thank you, Helen, for sharing that. And as I mentioned, we're joined by Sherry Norris, who is the Executive Director of the California Indian Environmental Alliance, CIA for short, not to be confused with the artist.
And I'm gonna swing from the chandelier.
And thank you for joining us today, Sherry. And we're just going to hop right into our conversation. We just wanted to start by asking you what brought you to do the work that you're doing with STIA, and how did you get started with doing that, and a little bit of your background. I know it's a lot, but just to sort of summarize that for our listeners. Well, first of all, I'm from the Osage Nation. We are currently in Oklahoma, and we're previous to that we were in Missouri, Arkansas, basically the river system area of in the Central Plains and Louisiana Purchase land. I grew up in California, and my family from Oklahoma lived very tightly. So we had my great grandma, my grandma, my aunts, my uncles. They all lived very closely with one another. In some cases, in the same apartment complex. And then moving to California, or to Northern California, we moved to Santa Rosa, and that is Pomo territory, and spent a lot of time in redwood trees on the coast, in water. We are a Beaver clan in Oklahoma, or from Oklahoma. We are water people. So grew up in or near water my whole life. The work I got started doing, working with tribes in California, came through the work that we did with International Indian Treaty Council. I was an intern at a few different tribal organizations, most notably the National Indian Justice Center, and then also the International Indian Treaty Council. The NIJC work was very law-based. That's a lot of the work that they do, is setting up tribal courts and Native American law. The Treaty Council work was international in scope. However, it quickly moved into the local, because what we were working on was mercury in fish. Mercury is a toxicant that it's an element, so it doesn't leave the body. It doesn't leave the environment. When it does leave the body, it takes about a year for it to leave. So it bioaccumulates, and it continues to accumulate in the body. And it affects developing fetus. It can affect people's hearts later in life. It can affect their learning abilities, and their neurodevelopment in general of an individual that's exposed in utero. And then as a small child, there's still effects where they can still have these toxins move through their body. So it's really important that we got the information out to California Indian communities that, unfortunately, because of the gold rush, the first huge environmental legacy amount of toxins that are working through our system. In every lake and river and stream in California has mercury of some kind in it, whether that's coming from the coal power plants in China, in the most pristine areas, say, for example, in Yosemite, in the moraines, or whether that's downstream from a legacy mine or the San Francisco Bay, where some areas of the bay are 2 feet higher because of sediment from the gold rush, all of those toxins are available to, given the right conditions, to move into the fish, which is the traditional foods for many families and California Indian peoples. So we were tasked immediately, as I was an intern, with going out and giving health presentations to the healthcare providers that give the health information to pregnant moms, to WIC clinics, to Native communities. We tabled events. We were out there, and it was very local in scope. At the same time, the Global Mercury Treaty was starting. So we were able to make sure that that included tribes in that treaty, although it's more of a trade treaty. We would prefer it to be more of a cleanup treaty. So what that meant was, when we did the work with the health piece, we did not want it to just say that you can't eat your traditional foods. I no longer wanted to hear any pregnant moms cry over the fact that they couldn't eat their traditional foods, because fish have omega-free fatty acids. Mm-hmm. So what we wanted to do is quickly move into, how do we get it cleaned up? If it's not going to get cleaned up through this Global Mercury Treaty, what else can we do? So that's how the work got started. The organization, the California Indian Environmental Alliance, started because the work was so local in scope. Treaty Council ended their program. So we were asked to launch an organization that would specifically work on toxins in water.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you for the brief introduction into the work you do with FIA. In relation to the environmental issues you brought up, how would you define traditional ecological knowledge, or TEK, or TEK, to our listeners?
You know, it's really interesting. It's across the United States that this is a topic, right? But in California specifically, in traditional ecological knowledge, we have the governor of the state of California has said that they want to solve climate change and other environmental issues using nature-based solutions. Well, the nature that people see when they look across the United States, and in particular California, because this is what we're talking about today and the work that we do, is that those landscapes were formed in collaboration with California Indian peoples. The fallacy that if you leave the land alone, it's going to do what it needs to do and it's going to take care of itself is not real, especially in California. This is an area where fire comes through, whether it be naturally or that it's put on the ground from man-made uses. So for TK here in California, it's interesting that the governor's asking for those nature-based solutions. And really, those nature-based solutions must be driven by tribes. There's also a fallacy that TK is just something that someone does in a small scale. It might be small scale, but when the entirety of the tribal members all are able to practice their cultures, that entire landscape is managed. TK is something that families might be doing, individuals might be doing, but entire sets of peoples need to be doing. It's a huge coordinated management system when it's not just being done by one person or by one family. Also interesting that we see TEK starting to show up in documents as something that the agency that's putting it there, the organization, wants to do. But it's extremely important that they always include that this has to happen in collaboration, in partnership, in co-management strategy with the tribe from those lands. We don't just learn about TEK strategies and apply them without the tribe, because there's some decisions that are made at that moment on the ground when you're choosing to use a methodology. At the time that you're doing a controlled burn, you may notice that the trees that are there need the smoke. Maybe there have some bugs that are in them, and that smoke can be pushed purposefully that direction, for example. And these are things that are happening on the ground at the time. And having tribes there to administer the treatment, whatever that is extremely important and necessary.
You know, I don't think we mentioned that Joel and I are both employees at CETA, so that's great. But now that you're mentioning what you just said about including tribes, that's one of the things that we're always finding ourselves like trying to advocate and push for, is that not just including tribes in what you're, planning on doing. And now that you're saying they're trying to put in TK, but having tribes be at those conversations when they start, before any planning, before all of that, having them to be at the very start of any of these things having to do with TEK for sure.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So that's a good segue into the next question. So does TEK differ from current infrastructures within like the Bureau of Indian Affairs and the Department of Water Resources and State Control Board? How does it differ from the way those agencies are practicing like land management?
We're working a lot right now on the issue of forest and fire, and many are in the state because of the last few years that we've had in California. So I'll speak of that agency in particularly. There's been a recognition that there aren't enough individuals with the qualifications or the approval from the federal state agencies to go out and work in fire. For tribes, fire is a cultural treatment that needs to continue in order for some plants to be usable for materials, whether it be a regalia, whether that be baskets or whatever that may be, or food sources, but also to make sure that the types of regimes of fires that we have seen that are huge because you've been repressing fire use for so long that you have all this tinder that's ready to go. But how that relates to your question is that we have been asking for burn bosses in the state of California and asking that tribes are able to have those positions. And you have to have someone on the ground who's responsible at the time that a burn is done. However, what we have seen, unfortunately, is even though the agencies and the governor has said that they would like to see more burn bosses, they'd like to see more tribes or tribal members in those positions, even after going through the training, they're not getting the final approval. So the old regime in the United States, where it's assumed the tribes don't have the qualifications or the management or the understanding or the knowledge in order to maintain the land, and that the colonizers that came here know more, or that Western science knows more. That regime is still pushing forward, even when we're able to get on the books, because the individuals that are being asked to promote new policies we're still raised with that racist mentality, honestly. So we have a huge amount of change to do in shifting what people's understanding, and then also the laws and the policies and the procedures, and all of it has to be in place in order for it to work.
Right. And I think that's part of the issue. You know, the idea is that, oh, Indians, right? They're calling us that we didn't know anything, then we just don't have this kind of knowledge that they have. When we were scientists, we were doctors, we were all of that before they came, you know, and colonized this country. So I think, yeah, it's pretty difficult trying to get them to see that, no, we actually know what we're talking about, and you know, we don't need to be what's that word, like gatekeeped and all of that kind of stuff. So yeah,
it's funny. Isn't it funny how we see, whether it be Facebook or some other social media platform, a new study will come out by a scientist and they'll say, look, we found out that XYZ, and look, going, yeah, we've been trying to tell you that. Get your science caught up with us.
Exactly. Like, okay, this has been for many, many years before you just now saying this. So yeah,
it's the idea that history started when colonizers came and created this like written word. And no, history's been on these lands for centuries, and I think we know Western society sees land as extractive and as something that is entitled and owed to us. But as Indigenous people, it's like, no, the land was a gift that we cohabit with and we take care of each other. And now you're slowly starting to get there, but like as Jojo mentioned, there's so much gatekeeping on who has the knowledge and if they're certified enough, and then there's like those practices of trying to hold their rubric to what tribal people know. And it's like, oh, well, you don't match up to our rubric. You don't know anything.
Well, even sometimes when you're looking for funding sources to fund a program for restoration, how that request for proposals is written can, in some ways, truncate what you need to do. You're kind of having to reinterpret their RFP so that it fits tribal land management practices, so that you can use the funds to do the work. And I think that with what's happened in California recently with climate change and fire in particular and drought, I think the state of California is asking for the information. It's just that it's the information that they're asking for has been repressed for so long that it's not like we can just grab the book, hand it, and give it to them. We need to be in a co-management position. We need to make spaces for tribes to have tribe-to-tribe conversations about the management techniques that were employed before. Which ones are we going to put back? How would they be done? What plants do we need to take care of given climate change? Which ones aren't going to make it? And how can we make sure if we need that plant, where can it live more sustainably? There's a whole bunch of conversations to be had about land management. And it's not just one piece of it. We often see also a lot of organizations jumping in and wanting to help Indians. And instead of setting it up, the program, whatever program is that tribes are in a leadership role, it's set up so the tribes are one of the many stakeholders. And tribes are governments. Tribes have a responsibility to their membership. We have a responsibility to piggyback up on what Joel was saying a moment ago. Joel, we have a responsibility, right? It's like we have to do it. We can't. It's not just what, no, we have to. So yeah, that's I resonate with what you're saying in that, that it's something that since time immemorial, since Creator gave us the responsibility to balance and manage this land. And it's something that we don't have dominion over the earth as a lot of the religions of the Western society or European religions believe. We actually are humbled before Creator, and it's a blessing to have the responsibility that we have.
Exactly. Yeah.
All right. So that's a perfect segue into our next question. You touched upon it a bit. Could you explain the relationship between forest and fire? Because you mentioned fire is seen as a dangerous, destructive force within Western colonial structures.
Well, absolutely, fire can be dangerous. I mean, we have all seen it in the last few years that it can go in, and now, especially with climate change in our current regime, it can go in and move so quickly that you see an entire mountainside engulfed in flames in a second. Mm-hmm. It wasn't
have we been having like fires consistently since like 2015 or something like that, like every year? Or I mean, I know they happened before too, but I just feel like they're just happening so much more now.
Every year, and where we are, our offices is physically in El Cerrito, and where we are in the Bay Area, we've seen forest fires around the state that end up making the Bay Area be a sink for all of the smoke. And it's extremely toxic, yes. Right? And right. Worse than we've ever seen before. So I would say that 2017 was bad. 2018, 2019 was extremely horrific. It's increasing. Yeah. It's not getting better. Mm-hmm. It's not going to get better on its own. And repressing fire, all that does is makes it so that the understory that needs to be burned, the pines that we used to have huge open meadows that have now been covered in pines. We had old growth oak trees, we had old growth redwood trees and other trees that are now catching fire because there's so much kindling around them that where they would normally not burn and fire would be useful for them. And they've evolved with fire. Now you have so much kindling that any small fire, given the right conditions of dryness and perhaps wind, can kick across and take over entire cities. This is the first time that we saw fire jump a freeway like we did in Santa Rosa, for example. They're just too hot and too fast. We need to get fire on the land. We need to get it through intentional burns We need to make sure that the tribal methods for putting fire in the land are being used. For example, in some regions, the tribes would purposely burn the ridge tops, recognizing that the fire would move up to the tops of those, and also the ridge tops are where they would travel. In other areas, that might not be the best place to put a fire break. We have to really intentionally look at where burns are happening and honestly let the tribes reinstitute some of those large management practices. That's really the place where we are right now.
Thank you so much. And this is kind of like sort of on the same, and I know you touched on this earlier as well, about how, there are cultural practitioners on how to, manage the lands, right? But we mentioned that there's this gatekeeping practice happening. And so what are California Native tribes doing to bring back or to push forward the cultural or prescribed burning to get that to be recognized as something that needs to be happening within the state of California, especially?
There are intertribal consortiums of tribes working together to get fire into landscape. There's controlled burning associations. There is funding that has come through from the state of California where tribes have been utilizing those funds to meet and train others in getting fire onto land. There are efforts to look at the landscapes and to decide where they should be set up for either fire breaks or a certain kind of a treatment of the area. There's a lot of efforts happening currently right now, and a lot of them are just now being kicked off. But in other places in the state of California, tribes have been doing this. It just hasn't been as visible to the state, I think, as it's beginning to be. And it hasn't been as far-reaching as it needed to be. And it was also done in a secret way because tribal members knew that it needed to happen and knew they needed it for, whether it be for regalia or for food or for basket-making materials or what have you. They knew that those plants needed that fire. There's also trees that need it in order to produce the seeds they have. So there were families and individuals and communities that were trying to do this, but never at the scale that was needed. And so right now, tribes are organizing like they haven't done before and need more support from the state to do that. And in particular, if we go through all of the efforts of training community members and tribal members to get fire on the ground, there has to be pay for those individuals to do that. I mean, it takes time to do it. So it's not something that you are able to, we can't address the scale of what we need to do in the state to get back on track when it comes to the use of fire unless we have year-round paid employees that are either working during fire season to make sure that those fires don't get out of hand, or when we're in a time period where it's okay to burn, to be able to get out there and get that fire in the ground, which means that we need to have crews who are working on fire one way or the other all year round.
Right. And I think that's part of the issue is definitely the pay, because they want all this knowledge from us, but then they don't want to pay us for that kind of knowledge. So that's an ongoing issue, I'm sure, for most tribes or groups who are trying to, bring back these cultural practices into today's like modern way of doing that.
It's important that we're able to move individuals who know how to fight fire around the state to address these big fires that are threatening people's homes and people's safety, of course. Or if there's old growth forest that would catch and burn to the ground if we don't protect it. Like this year, you saw that people were putting fire resistant materials around the base of trees in the giant sequoia area,
Right,
things that we never had to do before that we do have to do. So it's important that we're able to move people around to take care of things like that now.
Right.
But what we also have to have is our local crew, because what we do see is a fire will come in, the teams will come in to repress the fire. They'll stick around long enough to make sure it's out, and they leave. But that's actually when more work needs to begin, because now you have an area that might now be even more vulnerable for continued devastation if it's not addressed then. So we also noticed that some of the agencies will hire individuals from out of the area at a very low rate of pay, and that undercuts it so that those individuals, they get the job on the bid, and the local community that needs to pay local rent there need to also be paid. And it's important that the people that know the landscape, like the tribal members, are able to be there doing that work. There's a dedication when it's your community that is in the potential of being threatened versus, you're coming in, doing a job and getting out. It's not that the people coming in don't care. It's just they don't have the landscape knowledge.
Exactly.
They won't be kept there to continue to do the final work that needs to be done after the fire.
Exactly. It's kind of like that, like they put in the Band-Aid on it, like you said, putting the suppressants around the trees, and it's not something that had to be done before. And it's like, okay, that's great for now, but like long term, we need to get back to what was working before, and that's going to be the solution to being able to prevent a lot of these larger fires from, raging through the state like it does almost every year. So I think that's the bigger conversation that the state needs to recognize, and we need to start being able to have them understand that that's the whole point of trying to work with you all. But yeah, there's always some sort of barrier with that, right?
Right, especially with fire suppressant being so, such a movement that was pushed with Smokey the Bear and all these things, but it's more targeted to like the general population rather than like corporations and stuff. One of the biggest fires we saw in California was because of faulty wires on PG&E's part, and yeah, they were held accountable up to a certain extent after all the damage and everything. But what are the state and agencies doing to prevent? Like they're doing it for all of us to watch us and everything. But what about corporations? Corporations get like a pass, like you don't have to worry.
Yeah, and they know like yeah, we messed up this first time, but they also created like policies around their stuff where like they can't be attacked again if something does happen. Again.
Well, what's interesting with the PG&E piece is that the faulty lines sparked the fires, and then the response was they got a clear pass to go in and trim the trees. I say trim, take them out, like clear cut the trees around their power lines and underneath their lines. And in some cases that may have been needed to be done, but in other cases there were some large, big trees that would be sequestering carbon. Why does the line have to be right there? There seems to be this understanding back to the old regime that the infrastructure that's there is more important than the plant life that is in and around it. Instead of choosing where they put things based on what the environment,
what's allowable, right? Like
what the environment can
handle. Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, so in relation, you brought up specific actions that tribal people take with prescribed or cultural burnings to ensure their balance of the land. So this goes into our next question is, how does traditional ecological knowledge, or TEK for listeners, contribute not only to the healing of the land, but also of indigenous peoples?
Well, practicing your culture, I'll just speak for myself. So when I was going through some dark times of my own personal life, growing and becoming, moving from being a kid to a woman, and those experiences and those feelings, what worked best for me to feel good was to go back home and walk the trails where my relatives, my grandmother, my great-grandmother, my great-great-grandmother, where they had been. There's photographs of them in those places, so I know they were there, because I was told. And to look around and see the health of the land, and to feel re-energized by those places and that land, and by those foods that I was eating from there, and those activities. Then on the other hand, you can have entire sets of families that don't get the opportunity to eat their traditional food. So when it comes time to take care of that land, the knowledge of what the fish is supposed to look like, how the fish are supposed to act. When are you supposed to take the fish? Do you take them when they first start running, or do you wait until some of the stronger, tougher of them have gotten upriver to a certain point? There are decisions that are made before we take resources that are involved, that are part of that TEK discussion, that allow for, we managed our lands so that we were increasing the strength and resilience and the amount of the food source. And so what happens when we don't have a chance to get out there is that the resiliency of the diversity of that ecosystem isn't there. And by not being able to practice to eat traditional foods, we end up with diabetes and heart issues, etc. Eating very highly processed foods that are killing us. And I'm not saying that to be dramatic, right? We all know they are killing us, and it's especially very hard.
we get those commod bods.
I can't. And someone recently asked me, they were like, explain to me gluten. And I was describing the process of moving from a grain to processing it so much that it's no longer healthy. And as a matter of fact, it's actually the opposite. It's unhealthy. So if water is life, food is medicine, there's good and bad medicine, right? So you can put stuff in you that can kill you. But we know that traditional foods, for example, just move back to California again, is a salmon, seaweed, and acorn. If you eat that meal, it has all the nutrients your body needs. That's a complete meal. And that is our traditional food. And every single place in this planet has traditional foods that it yielded for the indigenous peoples of those lands. Every piece of land on this planet has indigenous peoples that took care of it. And then we try to impose our food, what we want to eat as non-tribal people, or, as the Western society, we try to impose that food onto that land, and it does not sustain it. And then we're surprised. Instead of us increasing the amount of the traditional foods like acorns, increasing the amount of large oak trees that produce acorn that we should be eating and that are very good for us. I really like it. I'm not from California, but I really like acorn. We're corn people. There's people that don't like corn. There's people that don't like acorn. I get that you need to have a diversity in your meals, but at a certain point, why is California the main exporter of almonds? Why? Why do we have to be that? Why do we have to take on that role? When the Central Valley was covered in wetlands, and there are food sources that enjoy and actually help to re-sequester water by their being there, by their actual physical being there. They're putting water in the ground that is our groundwater for us to drink. They're providing food for ourselves and for the animals that we would be eating. I know that we can't go back to everything exactly the way it is, but or the way it was. But there's got to be a balance that we choose to create. And I think that's the big picture TEK management that tribes would like to reinitiate through co-management.
As a California native, I personally do not like acorn.
What?
I can't get down with acorn.
I love acorn.
You need more salmon oil from the salmon drizzled on top for the saltiness and some more.
I don't like salmon either.
You need some chia seeds on top.
That's why I got this kamad bod. I'm telling you.
How about,
I'm with the fried bread.
Deer? How about deer?
I like deer.
Yeah, no, I don't know. But my mom loves it. Like anytime we get to go back to, our homelands in North Fork, like if we can get our hands on it for her, she would love it. And one of the things I did really like was sour berries.
Sour berries.
Oh, those are so good.
Those are good.
Like because of the fires and because of like the drought, everything like that. Like it's a bush, but it's so hard to find. Like you have to search to get sour berries, and if one of your relatives has it, I guarantee you they're not going to share, but just a few. So it's really, because it's so hard to find, and it's just crazy that you see, like you said, Sherry, like all of our traditional foods, instead of making more, they're like kind of just like disappearing or becoming like, changing and not being what they were used to be. And yeah, we definitely need to find that balance of like being able to still have access to that enough for the people of the land who are here to be able to still eat those foods. So yeah, for sure.
And if we could get other people's palates outside of just our own family, there's not enough of our traditional foods for all of us to eat them.
Right.
But if we could increase them for ourselves and for the outside community, acai berries, everyone loves them, and it's the big thing now that we've got to import. But like you mentioned, there's other fruits and berries that are here in California that we should have the opportunity to eat, but we don't. And it's really sad. I went to Cuenca in Ecuador for work back in the day, and went to the gelato counter, and there were more flavors of gelato there than I'd ever seen in my life anywhere, and they were all local fruits that
yeah,
we could have that all over the United States, you know.
definitely.
In different places, different pockets of foods that are acclimated to those climates that do well in that type of soil that are part of that web. And that's what we should be supportive of. But it's funny that you said that, Jojo, because when you say that you're not a big salmon eater and you're not a big acorn eater, and then Joel, you asked what's the importance of TEK and
Jojo proved
practicing
it.
your TEK. Well, Jojo, if you have kids, how are you going to get your kids to eat those traditional foods if they don't have that palate? So you're going to
have to make them eat it, not me.
Grandma's house. Yeah.
Exactly.
But that's
And they're gonna be like,
right?
they're gonna be like,
That's the
Mom,
point.
what?
And then also, if I've been eating that traditional food for most of my life, and other people around me have, you can tell the difference when things change.
Oh
Oh,
yeah.
How
yeah.
important is that? Those taste
Yes.
buds will tell you when something's not right. And then you can start, okay, let's move back to the Western scientific method. We did something very similar. We just didn't call it that.
Right.
But we would go through and try to figure out what has changed. We get the community together. We talk about it. What has changed that would make this be different? And
Yeah.
and then make a decision. Maybe that means we've been putting too much pressure on this area of the landscape, and we're
Right.
not going to collect that here for a bit. You know, maybe, you know, whatever that is, that's part of that big picture management that TK is a part of.
Right.
And I think that's why the work of SIA is so important, because of like people like me, you know, family, like you said, we're susceptible to diabetes, higher rates, we're, you know, high blood pressure, all of that stuff, which I even had at one point, and I, you know, changed my diet, lost some weight, didn't eat acorn or fish though, but I, you know, like imagine like what you're saying, like had I been able to have access to these foods the way that, like, say my grandmother did when she was growing up, or her mother and father before her, it would have been different. And then just the way that we live is just completely different from how it used to be. And like you said, like we know we can't go back to certain times of how it was, but it can definitely be shifted to
Right.
allow this access for us to be able to start to live better and heal, which is part of the question.
Yeah,
Right.
it's part of the healing. Absolutely,
Yeah.
is getting out on the land, doing the work, and that's part of it too. Is right now, I mean, we all have our COVID bodies, right? I have gained 20 pounds, and then before COVID, I wanted to lose 10, so I'm 30 pounds up. And you know,
Yeah.
there's people that have it worse or better than that, right? But
Yeah.
how am I going to lose that weight if I can't get off my duff and out from behind my computer and get out there and tend the
Right.
land and
Right.
do the work?
Exactly.
Like
Exactly.
we've got to get out. Our bodies are meant to move
To
and
move.
do.
Mhm.
Yes.
We
Or
have
we're gonna
work
end up
to
like
do.
those people on Wall-E.
Oh,
have you ever
we're
seen
just on
that?
the
They're just, like,
we're on the little
floating.
thing.
Yeah, I wonder
Yeah.
where they're getting their food there too. By the way, they act like they nothing was happening. But there was somebody there growing food somehow.
Right?
Or they
No,
were
that was it. It wasn't grown, and then Wally found like the plant life
they were
or
like
whatever.
they were
on
like
Earth or
drinking
something.
something.
Where
Yeah,
is that
it was
coming from? It's got to come from something.
They were like
Yeah.
they were like Soylent Greening people.
They're the greatest people.
Oh my.
Yeah. Oh,
I think
sorry. Well,
We digress.
then we're getting ready kind of to wrap up, and so like our last question is, what can folks do to center Indigenous voices within environmental and climate disaster issues? And it's a two-part question. Are there current policies or legislation that are bringing Indigenous people to the table, or how can people who want to contribute to creating a better environment and climate, how can they be a part of that?
Well, there's a lot of people that have pieces of that answer. I'll do my best with what I know. So what people can do, that's just very simply, is in the whatever work that you're doing, if you go into a meeting and you look around the room and you see the stakeholders, and you see that there's no tribes in the room or no tribal representatives in the room, and there's state and local agency people there, but no tribes, that's a moment to raise a red flag. You can stand up. You can say, hey, this is an inclusive process. We're trying to get people, all impacted communities at the table. And there's one community that's not here, and that, in fact, are the first people of this land, and we really need their information so that we can do the work that we're doing in a way that's going to be supportive of their community and the work that we're doing. And make sure that, I've heard of meetings ending because the tribes weren't there and saying, we're going to reschedule this meeting to get tribes to come. Or they can have a meeting and not make any concrete decisions at that moment and do the work to get the tribes engaged. And then the next piece that's related to that is actual tribal engagement, real tribal engagement. Mm-hmm. Real tribal engagement is not a letter to tribal council inviting them to work on this with them. Yes, you should engage tribal council that way. Absolutely. You should know who the tribes are in your area, and not just the federally recognized tribes, and not just those on the Native American Heritage Commission list that are the state recognized tribes. You need to make sure that all of the first peoples of that land, and not people like myself that have traveled here from other places. I'm a first person from somewhere, a first peoples person from somewhere. That's awkward. I might be a native person, but I am not from the land I'm physically on. Therefore, I'm not the best person to ask how it needs to be managed. Right. You have to have people from those lands at those meetings. And in doing that, you have to recognize that if it's an unrecognized tribe or a smaller tribe, they may not have the funds to be at the table with you. So to create a funding source for a true tribal engagement in all of the policies, procedures, bond, all of the fiscal processes that we've created to fund our work, there needs to be money in there for tribes to be engaged, to be directly engaged. And you need to put time together for the tribes to have tribe-to-tribe conversations among themselves, not coordinated by non-tribal entities, in order to arrive at collective, agreed-upon regional solutions. And that brings me to another piece is, don't invite just the tribes that you are most comfortable working with and leave the other ones out just because they're not your friends. You wouldn't have, go to Europe for a moment, you wouldn't have a conversation between Germany, England, and France about the European Union and not invite one of the other of them to the meeting because you just happen to not be buddies with them, and this happens more than you'd imagine. I talk to people and say, oh, how did you arrive at your tribal partners? They're like, oh, these are people that I've worked with for many years. I'm friends with them. It's like, okay, but did you reach out? Did you reach out to everybody that is impacted? And that brings me to the other piece, which is when they say we invite impacted tribes. Well, the impact is not just the footprint area of a project. It's the source, and I'm talking about water. It's the source of the water all the way to the receiving areas of the water. And it goes all the way out to the ocean in many cases. And so all of those tribes need to be engaged in that conversation. The other thing is when we outreach to the tribal environmental directors, we outreach to tribal leadership, we outreach to the tribal historic preservation officers, we outreach to as many individuals within the tribes as possible that work for the tribe, because we recognize that every tribe is structured differently, each and every one. And we do not know if there has happened to be, maybe there was an election recently, you have all new council, and the individuals that are in there might not be up to speed on the issue that you're sending them in a document to invite them to participate in. If you send it to the environmental director, same thing. They might be a new person, or maybe they're very focused in pesticides, but they just don't have the knowledge of understanding how to set water quality objectives and why that's important. But if you sent it to the tribal historic preservation officer, maybe they've been there longer and they happen to know. So anyways, the idea is that you want to send out the invitation to the environmental department, to TIPOs, to multiple people. Then lastly, how you can engage is to have tribes in decision-making positions. You're not just inviting them to sit there and listen and have you tell them what you're going to do to them and call it consultation because you told them what you're going to do. And you say, oh, how can we mitigate it? But we're doing it anyways. You got to go back to the United Nations work of the free and prior informed consent. Is the tribe giving you consent to do this work? And if it has to happen, then you have to work with them in partnership. But you can't come to the table with, we've already decided what's going to happen, tribes, and we're going to do it to you. That is so paternalistic, and we have come so much further than that. It's so disappointing when you see that rearing its ugly head again. And it is not gone yet, absolutely not gone yet. But on paper, it says we're not supposed to do that anymore, but yet it's still happening.
Yep, we're looking at you, Delta Conveyance Project.
Close him out.
And you know, that's really good. And I think this can apply across like all fields. It doesn't
Right.
even need to be just environmental, which is what we're talking about today. But people can go into these meetings, whether it's like your city council, meeting, or whatever it is, whatever, any position. I feel like you can always say when there's some big decision being made in regards to like land and water and anything like
Mhm.
buildings being built anywhere or anything like that.
School, education systems, curriculum.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Curriculum. Exactly. You can say, hey, have we consulted the tribes in this area about what needs to be done or what should be done, or can we at least get their input? And that can go across, like I said, a multitude of fields. It doesn't need to just be, land and water.
Glad you said that. Yeah, I'm glad you said that. That
Yeah.
also reminds me of one other piece, which is oftentimes we'll get a document to review, and you guys will remember this, right? We get a document to review, and they'll say, take a look at these 3 sections. These are the ones that are related to tribes.
Yes.
And then you look at it, and you're like,
Yeah.
the whole dang thing
Yeah.
is related to tribes.
Yes.
And they only sent us 3 sections to review, and now I got to go and find the rest of it.
Dig for the other part.
And it's
Where's
like
the rest
it's
of
like a
it?
200-page document.
Yeah. Yeah.
Don't choose for the tribes what is their area of interest.
Right.
Mhm.
You know?
Exactly.
So, yeah.
Well, that was it for our questions. And again, thank you for joining us, Sherry. It was a pleasure, and you're so insightful, and you just know so much. I wish I can pick your brain all the time like this. But we have work to do all the time, or you have work to do all the time. I don't know if you have any last remarks or closing remarks you'd like to add or anything like that.
Not really, but just thank you very much for having me. And I would just encourage everybody to take a look, find out who the tribes in your area, and find out what they're working on, what their current fight is. Every tribe is working on something right now. They can't work on every issue. Find out what they're working on and how you can be an ally. Ask them.
Thank you. And we're going to be posting Sia's website to our, Instagram and everything like that. And you can follow Sia at CIEA_health on Instagram, and on Twitter, CIE Alliance, I guess, because it's combined. And we're going to put the links and everything like that. And again, on our website, you could find that you could donate to the cause, and all of the great work that we have been doing and Sherry's been doing is all listed there. So thank you all very much. And
and 1, 2, 3.
That's
That's
a
a wrap.
We're so off, but that's fine.